This is The Guardian.
Hello and welcome to The Guardian Football Weekly. The future of football then, lots and lots to talk about. 4 clubs at the top of the Premier League spend buckets, the few below them can't. Is that helpful? We'll try and ask a more learned panel, offence intended, Dan, about a solution to PSR. We'll also ask Man City charges, any danger? And then to the clubs we discussed last week, Morecambe are still a going concern, but only through the love of fans and volunteers. Sheffield Wednesday are in danger, will be the latest, and ask why other fans don't really care. There's Lassana Diarra and FIFA possibly liable to paying compensation to thousands of players. All that plus your questions, and that's today's Guardian Football Weekly. On the panel today, Barry Glendenning, welcome.
Yes, I am one of the learned panel, Max, and I'm delighted to be here.
And now the learned panel. Philippe Auclair, welcome.
Bonjour, mon cher Max.
Bonjour, ça va. And from the Price of Football podcast, Kieran Maguire. Hey, Kieran.
All good, Max.
Yeah, James says, the best podcast lineup I've ever seen. Charlie says, I'm excited for Philippe to tell us that football has never been in a better place and that it's a future for all of us to look forward to, free of corruption, sports washing and financial strife for lower league clubs. There we are. It's all fine, isn't it, Philippe?
It's magnificent.
Yeah.
Now let's explain why it is magnificent.
Okay, great. Well, let's start at the top and work down, if that's okay with everyone. Jack says, with only 6 clubs allowed to spend money in the Premier League, and their right to spend seemingly totally disconnected from performance, see Manchester United, what's the point? So Liverpool's pursuit of Alexander Isak will have taken them to 400 million if they buy him, about the same that Chelsea spent last summer. This season, Chelsea, Arsenal and Man City have spent a lot. Man City did a lot in January as well. Last season's top 4 make up 4 of the top 5 spenders going into the new season. Manchester United, the other team. Spurs seem to have money to spend too. Gibbs White aside, it didn't happen. So, Kieran, are we seeing the beginnings of a kind of breakaway league within the Premier League? Certainly in terms of spending money, not necessarily where you finish in the league.
I don't think we're seeing the beginning. It's very much a continuation. I spent a couple of nights putting together a spreadsheet of the total spending.
You know how to
club.
live. You know how to live, don't you, Kieran?
If you look at the top 20 all-time spends, it's Chelsea have got 8, Manchester City have got 6, Liverpool have got 3, Manchester United have got 3. So nothing has changed as far as football is concerned. And we have seen Leeds United spend. To date, we've seen Sunderland spend well over 100 million. I think because they've not been what you would call marquee signings, they've been sensible. They've been signings aimed at finishing 17th in the Premier League, which is what their objective should be. It tends to go under the radar.
So then it's fine. So there's no, I guess the question, this is a sort of PSR question. So Philippe's first fall back and laugh. It's kind of, we tried to solve it yesterday and failed. This idea that there are clubs that could spend money, whether we like who their owners are or not, but can't spend money and kind of, Philippe, have a justifiable frustration in this when they look at what happens in the window.
Justifiable?
Oh, well, I don't know. Maybe not.
The thing is that PSR is very controversial. You have quite a few analysts, columnists who rail and rage against it. If you look at the case of the clubs, you cannot put all the clubs which spend a lot of money in the same box. For example, if you take Chelsea and Liverpool, I think you have 2 very different cases. And Kieran, who has got his spreadsheet, will obviously be able to correct me if I say something wrong. But in the case of Liverpool, what we have is a club which has been extremely profitable in the recent past. We've got a club which has been also very successful on the pitch, and which also spent close to no money last year, when the only arrival was Chiesa, as you remember, for something like £10 million. So they have built a huge war chest, and they're also selling players. They're probably on the way to sell Darwin Núñez. They basically are renewing a squad which comes, at quite a high price, because we're talking about replacing very, very high quality players. You add to that the fact that there is, of course, the fact that when you buy a player, you can amortize the purchase price over a certain number of years. When you sell a player, all of the proceeds go into your accounts for the same year. So it's quite virtuous. As far as I'm concerned, when I look at what Liverpool have done, I think I actually take my hat off and I say, well done, guys, because they're within the regulations. They're not endangering the club in any way. What they're doing is actually putting a squad which is going to carry on challenging for the top honours in England and in Europe. But I look at Chelsea and it's completely different. Because Chelsea is genuinely spending money which has been created out of some very interesting, quite bizarre operations, which include things like selling their own women's team to themselves, selling hotels to themselves. By the way, selling the women's team to themselves is also something that Everton has done. So they're finding ways around the regulations, which, to be honest, if it was about respecting the spirit of the regulation rather than the letter, they should be laughed at and told, no, you can't do that. And the problem, as ever, is about the implementation of regulations and sticking to principles which are supposed to give the rationale behind those regulations. The same way, and we'll probably talk about that UEFA is now welcoming multi-club ownership despite saying it's against it. We have the same thing of enabling clubs to play with those regulations and to find themselves in a very different situation. I hope this is clear enough, but Chelsea is not Liverpool. Absolutely nothing to do with that. And I think there is a temptation to paint everybody with the same brush. Arsenal actually can do what they're doing now, and it's not indicative of a will to tweak the market or play with the market in ways which are not acceptable. What is really concerning is the fact that the power is concentrated within a few clubs, but that's a different question. That's the super elite of the super elite. That's a different question. But I think we've got to be careful when we talk about general cases when there are actually some very, very distinct scenarios here at work.
Surely, surely there's a way. I mean, there are a couple of things that seem really wrong, don't they? Selling stuff to yourself, your man on the street seems like, I wish I could make money this way, but it seems ridiculous. And I'll deal with that one first, because the other one is about teams having to sell their academy products, which also seems wrong, but it's kind of part of the same mess, I guess.
Well, related party transactions, to give them their official accounting name, have to be highlighted in the club accounts. Now, under the UEFA rules, the sales of the real estate, the sales of the women's team, the swap transactions that we saw in the summer of 24, all of those are prohibited. So that's why Chelsea have fallen foul of UEFA's rules, and yet they have huge capacity within the Premier League rules. The Premier League could have introduced a tighter set of rules, but in order to achieve that, they need 14 votes. And because Chelsea have satisfied the Premier League rules at the time, the reason why there's no appetite to change the rules is it's now seen as a get out of jail free card, in the sense that we don't particularly want to do it, but we want to keep it in reserve. So the rules are farcical. When they came out, I used to teach a creative accounting course on Wall Street many years ago. So I'm used to finding ways around the rules. And I wrote down a dozen different ways that you could address the Premier League rules. And I've just been ticking them off one by one ever since then. The problem is that the Premier League is not independent of the clubs. And therefore, Richard Masters, whilst he probably wants to have a set of rules which have credibility, he can't do so because he needs 14 votes in favour.
And the regulator wouldn't do anything about that?
No, it's not it's not within the regulator's remit to set the individual terms and conditions under which clubs operate in terms of cost control. You've got an independent UEFA who have managed to do this. And also you've got the crazy situation that these sales of the hotels and so on are not allowed under EFL rules, because when we had a spate of those in around about 2018-19, the likes of Derby, Birmingham City, Sheffield Wednesday, Reading and so on, the other clubs did think it was a farce and therefore they voted to stop it. So if Chelsea were relegated, they might be in breach of the EFL rules. Because of their historic transactions.
What's the dream, Barry, isn't it? The dream is, because there's always been teams with more money than other teams, right? There's always been a hierarchy and you know where you are in the pecking order. But what is the dream? That anyone can win the Premier League? Or that it's just more competitive, and that, you know, teams that come up could go straight on and compete. Teams that go down might not have a massive advantage to come up. Do we want socialism in football? What do we want?
I don't necessarily want socialism. I mean, we talk about teams that are able to spend way more money than other teams. Those teams don't necessarily spend their money wisely. Manchester United being a case in point. Many of their very expensive acquisitions have been complete flops, an alarming number, in fact. Okay, you've this group of clubs, which I mentioned yesterday, Newcastle, Nottingham Forest, Villa, Everton, who all have money they would like to spend on players but aren't allowed to because of PSR. Take Newcastle, for example, whose owners are unspeakably rich. Their fans are frustrated because their owners are not allowed to spend money on players that the club hasn't earned. Well, then find ways of earning money. Look at Brighton. Brighton have made fortunes scouting talent in South America or Japan or wherever that have never inched their way onto the radar of other bigger clubs, bought them for pennies and sold them on for tens, or in the case of Moise Caicedo and McAllister, 100 million quid. And that gave them the funds to spend a lot of money last summer. And I think Brighton are one of the most smartly run clubs on the planet, if not the smartest run club. And I would see Brighton as potentially breaking that big six hegemony in the next few years. And their owner, Tony Bloom, he's pumped money into Hearts in Scotland. He did a Q&A the other night for Hearts. He doesn't speak publicly very often, but he did a Q&A for Hearts fans the other night, which apparently was massively impressive. And I was watching the Hearts-Aberdeen game last night, which Hearts won easily, and he was interviewed beforehand, and he's not one for bombastic statements, but he seems to be genuinely convinced that in the next 10 years or less, Hearts can win the Scottish Premier League, that can break up the Celtic Rangers duopoly, and I believe him. So just, if you're not allowed to spend money, just spend the money you are allowed to spend better.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with that. I mean, it's always difficult for me to praise Tony Bloom given what I think about multi-club ownership, but it's a rare example of a virtuous version of it, because it's limited, because it's completely transparent, and because the methodology which is behind it is has been proven right. To be honest, I mean, with the case of Newcastle, it actually quite amuses me when I hear fans complaining about the fact that they can't spend money on the transfer market. If I'm not absolutely wrong, when Eddie Howe arrived at the club and the Saudis arrived at the club, they actually spent more in net in a calendar year than any other club on the planet, including Barca, Paris Saint-Germain, Real Madrid, Inter, you name it. They actually spent more at the time. And if the little chickens have come home to roost, what's the problem with that? And I agree with Barry that you have to look at a system that is actually meritocratic and rewards virtuous behavior. When virtuous behavior doesn't mean you're sharing your fortune with anyone, Max. It just means keeping within certain parameters which are morally and acceptable and also fit in the regulations. And if they can't do it, well, sod them. That's the amount of sympathy I've got for those clubs.
No, fair enough. Ben says, hi team, is there any news, rumour? Has Philippe got a deep throat style leak around the Man City charges? The new season's just around the corner with still no certainty on the outcome. Also, who's the hardest sportsman ever? Why is it Chris Wokes? It's a different podcast, but yeah, what a great sight that was yesterday. I'll go to you, Kieran. Actually, do we know anything about the charges? Because it was definitely going to be last season, and now it hasn't happened yet.
No, we know nothing at all. There are probably no more than 4 people in the country that are knowing the progress of the outcome, 3 of which are on the panel itself, and the 4th person is the person who's got the really tough job of having to type up the whole thing. So I talk to lawyers on a regular basis, and they've said nothing will be leaked out. This is an incredibly professional operation. Given there was I think 50 or 60,000 pieces of evidence at the Everton Commission. If you multiply that over a period of 9 years under which Manchester City were being assessed, you probably got 500,000 documents to review, and then there's 130 charges through which they have to be filtered as well.
So it could last forever. It could be forever, that.
There have been some rumours, Max. There's bound to be rumours. But it has been said,
right?
I have heard that nothing before October of this year. And you have to think that if we hear anything in October, it doesn't mean it's the end of the road. It means that the process will then go into another phase with appeals and things like that.
It's like Arsenal.
Yeah.
Which phase are we on now?
Oh dear. So there is absolutely John Dice v John Dice, and with the Etihad as bleak house. I mean, it's quite extraordinary, but there's no sign that we're going to see anything anytime soon. As I said, October 2025. But to be honest, it's one of those, Max. You keep kicking the ball a little bit further in the long grass.
It's like your Uber Eats delivery when it says, preparing your order, and then, he's on his way, but the bike isn't moving towards you. And then it keeps going further and further. He's got 3 other deliveries to do. And you're just like, this pizza's getting cold, for God's sake.
And then it gets cancelled.
And that is and then you can't, there's no one you can message. You just shout at the street. Lots of listeners are interested about multi-club ownership and have looked at, Nottingham Forest have 2, Marinakis owns more than 1, Textor owns more than 1, or, has shares in more than 1. And yet, because Textor didn't fill a form in at the right time, Palace are punished and Forest aren't. And it doesn't sort of fit, a bit like Chelsea selling stuff to themselves, the purity or the letter of the law. I don't know if that takes us any further down the good or the bad of multi-club ownership, Philippe.
I think in the case of multi-club ownership, anybody who had any hope that the system would actually be challenged at international level can now put those hopes aside. You who enter here abandon all hope, here being UEFA. It is now accepted by UEFA that you can have clubs belonging to the same entity taking part in the same competition. This was the case for last year Manchester City, with Manchester City and Girona. This could have been the case with Nottingham Forest and Olympiacos, which is the second club owned by Marinakis, and the third one is Rio Ave in Portugal. And they would have been able to compete, had they qualified for the Champions League, in the same competition as Olympiacos, because what they use is a system called the blind trust system, by which the owner or the controlling owner of a club passes on the management. I'm simplifying stuff here.
Please
the management, basically for whatever time is needed, that person no longer has direct control over his assets. I said his because they're all men.
So a good example is Mark Carney in Canada. Now he's the Prime Minister of Canada. Right?
Mark Carney, obviously, he has assets, shares, and so forth. And being the Prime Minister of Canada, obviously, he's party to information which would be very, very valuable to actually manipulate the markets. So what he does is that, okay, for the time that I'm a Prime Minister, I pass on the control of these assets to a third party. I've got absolutely nothing to do with them. And he genuinely does, by the way. I have no control. All they have to do is send me some accounts from every 6 months, I believe, saying this is the financial performance. As to what they have done, he doesn't know. He has no influence on that. So that, let's say, Marinakis will pass on the control of Nottingham Forest for a period of 1 season, if Nottingham Forest had qualified for the Champions League. And he passes on to somebody else who takes care of the club, takes care of the asset, and no problem, he has no control over it. Just the same way, Jim Ratcliffe also did it for Nice and for Lausanne 2 years ago and last year. It's a complete joke, because the idea that Evangelos Marinakis has no control and no interest in the club anymore is actually a complete...
He was quite close to Morgan Gibbs-White, but maybe that was just coincidence. just a coincidence.
But what is extraordinary is that, so therefore multi-club ownership is now accepted in European football.
Isn't the issue, Kieran, I guess, if you are a smaller club in a multi-club ownership, right, in a sense, the immediate thing might be successful for your club. So like your dream for your team to win this game might help that you are owned by Man City. The larger dream may not exist. And I suppose it's a bit like, who your owners are, right? Because football is this thing that we are that controls us in a way, that we don't sit there and go, I don't want to be part, I don't want Cambridge to be part of a structure that's owned by Real Madrid, because ultimately it means we won't win the Champions League. I might think we might get, Rodrigo on loan. I mean, that's a ridiculous example, but you take my point. That's how they win, because we are too focused on the next game.
You're absolutely right. If you take a look at what's happened between Chelsea and Strasbourg this summer, Strasbourg have signed players from Chelsea. I think they've got 2 or 3 players on loan from Chelsea as well. That could certainly assist. And then it's a case of, do you feel that you've lost your identity in doing so? I think when Manchester City attempted to acquire, was it Breda in the Netherlands, there was a pushback from the fans, because they said, we'd rather be Breda on our own merits than as part of an MCO. There are theoretical benefits and conceptual benefits to having an MCO, but realistically, we've never seen those put into practice. What tends to happen is that the mothership, the senior club within the partnership, is the major beneficiary, and the other clubs sort of are effectively tugboats who are just assisting the success of the prime club.
Yeah, we've had lots of questions about various specific multi-club ownerships that we can't necessarily go into detail without getting right of reply from people who don't necessarily always give you right of reply, if you understand what I mean. Anyway, that'll do for part 1. We'll be back in a second. Welcome to part 2 of the Guardian Football Weekly. Rob says, Dear Football Weekly, do you have a live show coming up anytime soon? If so, please mention it on the pod so no one misses out. Thanks for the reminder, Rob. Yes. Thursday, September the 11th, we're playing the Troxy in London. The usual carousel of favourites from the Football Weekly family. To be announced panel. Some outtakes, a few videos we're working on. Maybe some music. We'll see. Tickets can be purchased at theguardian.com/footballweeklylive. Looks like they're selling quite well, which is nice to know. If you aren't in London, we're live streaming the show. Tickets from the same link, theguardian.com/footballweeklylive. Let's talk about Sheffield Wednesday and Morecambe. Lots of conjecture on social media yesterday that Morecambe had ceased to exist. Sani Rudravajula was there. I messaged him and he voice messaged me back from inside the club, and the stadium manager was sitting next to him saying, no, we're still open, but there's no cash. Lots of people are just keeping it going for no money at all. And we had quite a lot of questions like this. Billy saying, given what's happening at Sheffield Wednesday and Morecambe and the severe lack of mainstream coverage where outlets would rather cover transfers and friendly matches between Premier League clubs, can anything be done to highlight these cases in future? And actually, Kieran, it's interesting, and I don't know if this reflects on the Price of Football pod as well, but when we do episodes about whether Alexander Isak might be going to Liverpool, we will get more listeners than if we do a special about the future of EFL clubs in crisis. And obviously, we need listeners. Sky Sports News needs viewers, blah, 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 blah. So it's, sometimes it is difficult, but lots of fans saying, look, you don't care until it's your club, basically.
I think there has been a fair amount of coverage. The fact that, Sani's been working for Sky Sports, it has been covered on BBC. I was on BBC One on Sunday morning talking about Morecambe, so that there is a concern. At the same time, we all know what generates engagement, and that is the obsession that people now have with the transfer market, and sort of the number of fans that live in reflected glory in terms of their own self-assessment and self-worth when their side is seen to be spending large sums of money. We perceive ourselves to be a better and bigger person as a result of it. So I think the amount of coverage in the mainstream media has been, I think, has been very fair. There was a fantastic article by Gregor Robertson in the Times over the course of the weekend, which went into an awful lot of forensic detail about the ways and wherefores of Jason Whittingham, the colourful owner of Morecambe Football Club.
What can they do, Kieran? Because they say there's no money, so like volunteers and love is great. It doesn't last forever. The people coming in or who want to buy it, there are questions about them as well, aren't there?
Yes, if you take a look at the companies which are owned by the people connected to Punjab Warriors, they seem to have been set up in the last few years. They don't seem to be generating significant amounts of cash. I think the one consolation is that the EFL, who have significantly upped their game since Trevor Birch took over, did appear to have approved them under the owners and directors test. And the big issues there is, A, do they have the money? And B, can they show where the money's come from? If you tick those boxes, that does give you a degree of comfort. But ultimately, if Jason Whittingham doesn't want to sell at the price that Punjab Warriors want to buy, and with the mysterious Johnny Cato having come and gone within 48 hours, and I know who Johnny Cato actually is, and his name's ain't Johnny Cato, that's for sure. The options are either Whittingham finds some cash to support the club, because it is losing money, there's no doubt about that, or it goes into liquidation, because I don't think you can put it into administration when you haven't got a board of directors.
It was an interesting thing about the fit and proper persons test, Philippe, in the sense that, it should one question be, are you better than the current one? Because, if you're a Morecambe fan, you might go, well, we're not sure about these new prospective owners, but they're certainly better than this guy who appears to be completely shameless. And I don't know how he sleeps at night, and he just doesn't care about anyone or anything to do with that football club.
Well, I'm happy to hear Kieran saying that since Trevor Birch has arrived, the EFL is a bit more thorough, but I do think that the owners and directors test is still lacking a lot in terms of its forensic nature. It tends to be an exercise in ticking boxes, which are, to be honest, very easy to tick. And I think that there is, when you're thinking about the work that is going to be put on the regulator's desk, when the regulator becomes a regulator for real, that would be certainly on the list. But how do you frame the question? Because even France, for example, has been quoted as a model when it comes to that because of the Direction Nationale de Contrôle de Gestion, the DNCG, the French regulator. Well, the DNCG has done some very great things and is much more thorough when it comes to financial analysis of clubs and much more severe and stern when it comes to people breaching the regulations. But they've still allowed one particular person to become an owner despite this person being a felon, right? And so I'd like to see some kind of international court of football where actually, because it's a global game, so where actually when somebody wants to become the owner of a professional football club, there is actually genuine investigation into these people. But there isn't. It's probably because football is ideal for playing with money. It's ideal for hiding money. It's ideal for laundering money. It's ideal for taking money from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction. It's going to attract an awful lot of very bad people. Directors, I'm going around in circles because, to be honest, I don't know what to do except look at the wall and bang my head very hard against it and saying it hurts, but what else can I do? The owners and directors test is not fit for purpose. That's the bottom line for it. Absolutely not fit for purpose.
I'm very taken by Philippe's idea or call for a football equivalent of The Hague.
Yes.
But to go back to your original question, Max, I think, do people who aren't connected with Morecambe care about Morecambe, or do people who aren't connected with Sheffield Wednesday care about Sheffield Wednesday? Do people who have no attachment to Crystal Palace care whether Palace are in the Europa League or not? I think largely no. They might look and go, oh, that's a shame. Anyway, has my club bought a new goalkeeper yet, or have we got a striker yet? I looked at Sané's package from Morecambe yesterday, and it was on social media, and a load of the comments underneath it were ranged from, why didn't you cover this earlier, to, I see they've still got Sky Sports in the clubhouse, or just general shoulder shrugs. And I think that is generally the case. And it's a bit of a shame, but there's no reason why people who have no attachment to Morecambe or Sheffield Wednesday should care as much about Morecambe and Sheffield Wednesday as people who are attached to to Morecambe and Sheffield Wednesday.
Sure. And of course, it's all part of, people live lives and, have other things to worry about. And that is a good point. Kieran?
I think to give the Premier League some credit, they did put a series of hurdles in front of 777 to stop them from acquiring Everton. I'm certainly aware of attempts by scamps and scallywags to acquire clubs in the EFL.
Is that a company? Is that a company?
It's a law firm. where the EFL has made it suitably awkward for ultimately these people have walked away. The current owners don't want the rules to be too draconian because they're saying to themselves, at some point in time, I may want to sell this club. So therefore, why restrict the pool of potential buyers? Because I want to extract the maximum price at sale date. So the issue with football is that everything is driven by short-term self-interest, and that dictates the set of rules that we have, particularly in the Premier League.
Kieran, how do you feel about the regulator, and how much faith do you have in it, or do you think it will be, in tray, just like a reams of paper going up to the ceiling, and just someone going, "Oh God, I don't know how to deal with all of this"?
I'm in favour of the regulator in sadness rather than joy, in the sense that we have a football association that should be the independent regulator. It should have the capacity to look after the interests of the whole game. But it's shown the backbone of a jellyfish in recent years. When you looked at Project Big Picture, when you looked at the Super League, it sort of said, "Tut tut, that's not very nice," and then effectively washed its hands. So yeah, we shouldn't need a regulator. It's a stain on the game that there is such a breakdown in trust of the people who are in charge that a third party needs to get involved. I think in David Cogan, they've got somebody who will be combative, who won't be. He certainly won't be a political patsy. But the remit of the regulator is actually very, very narrow. So could it stop another Morecambe? No, it can't, because the present 92, 116 incumbents, because we've got the National League as well. How do you weed those out? It's very difficult with the state of current company law.
Could I ask Kieran, or indeed Philippe, how independent do you think this independent football regulator will be? Because I don't know, when it was being passed through the House of Lords, the Tory peers tried their damnedest to destroy it. Karen Brady, who is obviously big cheese at West Ham and is a baroness and in the House of Lords, she alone tabled nearly 20 amendments to the regulator bill. So I am aware it has a very narrow remit, which is worrying, but I'm also very concerned that this independent football regulator won't be independent at all.
My view is that it will be independent, having seen the people who are at the very top in terms of the chair and the proposed chief executive. They're similar in some ways to the governor of the Federal Reserve in the United States, who he's quite happy to resist pressure from Donald Trump in terms of the decisions that are made. It's unfortunate that now it's become part of culture wars. So as we saw, what was originally a cross-party agreement in terms of the future of the game, and Tracy Crouch, I think, chaired the commission very well, has now become factionalized. So Reform are opposed to it. A significant proportion of the Conservative Party are opposed to it as well.
Which makes me sound like it sounds like a really good idea. If you look at who's against it, it's always a good way of checking, isn't it, Philippe?
Yeah, for the football regulator, and I have checked, there is a letter which was sent by Stephanie Peacock MP, who is the Minister for Sport, Media, Civil Society and Youth, in response to a query by Tracy Gilbert. And I've been sent this letter and I've been told that I could use it. So that we are absolutely fine, Joel. This is totally above board.
I love the pre-caveats of, I can say this. Yeah, a classic Philippe. Yeah,
it has to be, because I'm quoting from a correspondence between a minister and an MP here, which I was party to. And it says, I will quote from it: "The independent football regulator will not intervene on sporting competition or commercial matters." That's the sentence. So, cannot intervene on sporting competition or commercial matters. And you wonder, well, what can it intervene on then? What's left? And this was in relation to multi-club ownership. And the response was, therefore, issues like multi-club ownership are for the football authorities to manage. There are existing UEFA and league rules relating to multi-club ownership, blah, 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 blah. And so basically, it seems the more we know about what the work of the IFR, football regulator, will consist of, and despite, I'm willing to believe that David Cogan is a great appointee, but it looks like his field of prerogatives is getting narrower and narrower, because if the IFR cannot intervene on sporting competition or commercial matters, what can the IFR intervene on?
It will have a beefed up set of powers when it comes to the owners and directors test, and it will have the power of statute behind it. 3 weeks ago, the government published the annual assessment of terrorism and money laundering, and there was a specific section in that relating to money laundering in football. So this is something which I think has gone under the radar. I was asked to give a talk to Interpol and Europol and the National Crime Agency about 3 years ago, and I was quite excited at the time. So I thought, I'll be, it's got to be Miami or Monaco or Tokyo, and it was taking place in Warrington, which didn't quite fit my expectations. But I was talking to some senior law officials at the time, and they raised the issue that football transfers, along with crypto and fine arts, is one of the major opportunities for money laundering in the world. So that's something that will be addressed as well. The prevention of a franchise club arising. What happens if somebody says, well, yeah, I want to go and move, I'm going to buy Morecambe and we're going to relocate them to Dublin because we think that there's a football market there. Well, these types of things will be prevented under the regulator. And also Super League. Super League's not dead. It's in hibernation, but I can assure you it's not dead. It's going to make it that much more difficult for people to be able to jump ship and join organisations such as that.
Did I see somewhere that the football regulator will be powerless to stop the government waving through, say, potential state owners, as Boris Johnson did with the Saudi investment fund, who we were assured at the time would not have any part in running Newcastle United?
Well, I think the regulator has to take into consideration the broader issues of what's best for UK PLC. So at present, there are no opportunities for the Premier League to stop a state-owned club, provided there is one individual who ultimately is deemed to have control of the club. Then the Premier League has to go along with that. I don't think that position will change under the regulator.
Question from Michael says, hi Football Weekly, long-time listener, first-time caller for either this or the price of football. Kieran's made reference several times that a salary cap would be difficult to implement in football, but when F1, which has 7 out of 10 teams based in the UK, and sports such as rugby league successfully implement a cap, what are the biggest barriers to bringing this to football?
Well, I think first of all, there's no desire necessarily amongst owners, because the step-ups in terms of, if you now qualify for the Champions League, that can be worth up to an extra £150 million a year. Secondly, we are operating in a global market in football, and we're not doing the same in rugby league. So we saw when there was the initial introduction of a cap in rugby union that English players started playing in France where there was no cap. Well, you would see the same if there was a hard cap. And then from an economics point of view, where do you set the cap? If you set it too high, it makes no difference. If you set it too low, you lose the best players to La Liga and Serie A and so on.
All right, that'll do for part 2. Part 3, we'll begin with the Lassana Diarra European Court of Justice. Will footballers get all their money back case? Welcome to part 3 of the Guardian Football Weekly. Philippe, I'm not sure if I got my words correct there at the end of part 2, but you can correct me. Matt Hughes writing in the paper, FIFA facing a multi-billion pound compensation claim from former players. This is to do with Lassana Diarra. You have explained it before. Not for me. I'm obviously still completely across it, but for listeners who might not remember it, could you, and please simplify, explain what has happened and where we're at?
It is impossible to give a simple version of things, and this explains why it's taken years and years. Lassana Diarra was caught in a situation where basically He signed for a Russian club, fell out with the manager, and basically he was found to have been in contravenance of his contract, and he basically had to pay an awful lot of money to the club for having breached his contract. And he said, "No, absolutely not. That's not the case. I'm really simplifying it a great deal. Basically, what it did is it moved the goalposts in the relationship of between the player and the club, which was felt to be completely skewed in favor of the club, who had basically the right to treat the players the way they wanted to treat the players, and that the players were put in a situation where they're basically there to be exploited. And Lassana Diarra actually won his case thanks to the help, amongst others, and this actually made Kieran and myself chuckle when we were preparing this podcast. Of course, Monsieur Dupont, the lawyer, is still involved in that. He was involved in that. He was involved with Bosman, and he's involved in the new case. He won't let go. So the idea, when it comes to the new lawsuit, the idea is that footballers haven't got all the money they should have got because of the transfer regulations. I mean, to be honest, when I read the statement, which was the class action against FIFA, which was released yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, I thought this was nonsense. I have to be honest with you, Max. I thought this was nonsense, and that there is absolutely zero chance that a case which is trying to get compensation for thousands of players, quote, whose earnings were compromised as a result of FIFA restrictive rules on termination of contracts and transfer and so forth. The idea that this legal action is going to have any kind of result, I think that makes absolutely no sense. I mean, maybe I don't know the dossier as well as I should, but a class action of that kind in a Dutch court, good luck, guys. I don't know would you agree with me on this, Kieran. Did you get the feeling it was Mr. Dupont again trying to sing a hornet's nest and couldn't resisting kicking it in?
For the sake of complete transparency, I've had quite a few phone calls with Mr. Dupont, mainly when he's on his bicycle cycling around Belgium, as is his wont. He's extremely confident, and he was equally confident in the Bosman case and the Diarra. I don't think they're necessarily looking for the destruction of the transfer market as such, but as we have seen in certain individual cases, players have been treated poorly. They've been made to train with the academy. They've been marginalised, and that does have an impact upon their longer term earnings. And I think in specific cases there is a case to answer for. Whether we're going to have a similar to the mis-selling of pensions or insurance, or the major issues that we've seen this week in terms of car loans, we'll have to wait and see. But he's a very intriguing character, and very committed to the cause.
Kieran, if I may interject here, in the Lassana Diarra case, it was a very clear case because you had a club, you had a CAS decision, and so forth. It was very clear. In a class action against who? FIFA?
FIFA is the defendant, as are, I think we've got 5 football federations in Europe.
But how can you, I'm being the devil's advocate here, but I do know Dupont a little bit as well, and I know he's not a man who's adverse to personal publicity. Would you agree on that? And the thing is that on the particular cases, I can understand the validity of particular cases, like Lassana Diarra could be one. There might be one coming with Mihailo Mudryk for all we know. I don't know. But when it comes to a class action, which refers to thousands and thousands of different cases, the validity of each case has got to be proven before the class action has achieved. It's not quite like the NFL players instigating a class action against the NFL because of the concussion rules and the fact that they have been the victims of complete lack of care from the NFL, which can be proved in court, medically proven, and so forth. This is not the case. You have to prove it in every single case that this player suffered financially because there were restrictions put on his free movement, and he couldn't choose his employer as he should have been able to, because it was against the EU competition rules. You have to do it for each and every one of them, or is there a kind of meta-legal dimension where the class action can be brought just on a point of principle?
Well, first of all, the players have to register with the new organisation that's been set up if they feel that their earnings have been compromised. Now, it could be then that if there's enough people in that, then the representatives, including Mr. Dupont, could approach FIFA and say, yes, we can do this on a case-by-case basis, or alternatively, let's just have an overall class settlement. You'll pay us X and we will distribute it to everybody that's registered.
I don't know, Mr. Dupont. I did start reading up on this Lissana Diarra potential class action yesterday, and I have to say, it is the most boring thing I've ever read, and I still have no idea what it's about, despite the two lads having spoken about it at length for about 10 minutes.
Can I finally, and maybe I should have asked this right at the top, and maybe it's too difficult a question to answer. Is there one thing in the game that sort of keeps you up at night when you think about the future of football and where it is heading? Is there one thing that makes you think this is the thing that we need to solve? This is the biggest problem that we have? I will go to you, Kieran, first.
For me, it's the creeping return to racism and obnoxious behaviour within us as a fan base. What was not acceptable 10 years ago is now acceptable amongst many, and it's only heading in one direction. And I think the use of football culture and football fans by certain groups and individuals is my main concern.
Wow. And is that manifest in your match going experience?
Well, I'm a Brighton fan, so I'm on the receiving end of increased homophobia when going to matches, and it's tedious to begin with, but it's not affecting me necessarily directly. It's not right. It's pretty foul, some of the stuff that you have to put up with, and we had managed to improve things significantly, but we saw Salford City take a stand a couple of weeks ago in a friendly when one of their players was racially abused. People now feel emboldened enough to say what they want.
But why do you think that is?
Because we now have a culture war where freedom of speech absolutists believe that they can say whatever they want, and they're testing the waters on a permanent basis.
Well, it's very depressing. It's actually interesting because I haven't had the same experience myself. This being said, I go to the Arsenal games and I go to Arsenal women games where the atmosphere is very different from that. But it's really sad to hear that, Kieran. That's horrible. But if there's one thing that keeps me awake at night, and it has, is that I can see the descent of professional club football, men's club football, actually women's club football as well, into a business which is now targeted by criminals. Maybe it's because of the type of work that I do, working, on sponsorships, illegal betting, corruption, all these sort of things, and you tend to have a slightly distorted view of the world when you do that day in, day out. But it seems that we are now caught in this spiral where the amount of money which is at stake here and the complete lack of international regulations, to be honest, the lack of a regulatory framework which could be applied worldwide, is enabling some very, very bad people indeed to go into football. And they can be traditional criminals like drug traffickers or people traffickers, or you name it. And they can also be the new, for me, perhaps even more dangerous people, and all these shadowy equity funds and investment funds whose money, nobody knows where the money comes from. And that is one thing that literally I cannot understand that, Max. It's the fact that you will hear such and such an investment fund has taken control of that club, but it's not their money. Whose money is that? And very often you will find out this money comes from very, very dark sources indeed. And absolutely nothing is done to fight against it. Nothing. I'm super worried about that, because I can see football becoming the thing of those people who, for me, are criminals.
And actually, on that note, you do lots of work with Josimar, and Josimar's future. How is it? Because I know you sort of set out an appeal recently.
Yeah, the appeal was successful, and I'm sure there were plenty of Guardian Football Weekly listeners who've helped out by either donating or subscribing, which is the best way to support us. And we're so thankful, because we managed to turn that corner. It was a tight corner, and we really thought that the work we did in June would be the last work we did together as a magazine. And fortunately and thankfully, and thanks to our readers, we have just garnered enough resources to carry on for a while. So it is good news. It's bad news for bad people.
Bad news for bad people. That is Philippe Auclair. That should be your moniker, shouldn't it? I'm here. Bad news for bad people. All right. Well, I don't know if we solved football, but it was interesting.
Can I ask, Kieran? Right, so you do the price of football with our friend Kevin Day, the Crystal Palace supporting comedian. I've already had a row with him on the radio about this, but can I ask, now that he's not sitting beside you or in the room with you, maybe he is in the room with you, but I can't see him, I think Crystal Palace just effed it up as far as the Europa League is concerned, and they're reaping what they sowed. John Textor and Steve Parish didn't fill in the form in time, so sorry, lads.
Well, my view is that being a bit tin pot isn't sufficient for them to lose the opportunity to play in the Europa League. I think that there were individuals who've made errors, and I think those individuals should be sanctioned rather than the club as a whole. Crystal Palace gained nothing from the failure to fill in those forms on the pitch. So therefore, to give them an on-pitch penalty, which is effectively demoting them to the Conference League, to me seems harsh. So yeah, I would have an internal investigation at Palace to find out, why aren't you reading the emails?
I mean, it just seems such basic stuff.
I think you're being really harsh, because the paperwork had to be filed in by 1st of March, right? 1st of March 2025, was there anybody who thought that Crystal Palace had any chance of qualifying for a European competition?
Well, nobody at Crystal Palace.
No. I mean, they didn't. I mean, just for the Palace fans' backlash, Barry's no longer on X, but you can find him on Blue Sky. But I'm with you, Kieran. I think you're right. I think they should play where they should play. Anyway, that'll do for today. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Philippe.
Thank you very much, Max.
Cheers, Kieran.
Cheerio.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you.
Football Weekly is produced by Joel Grove. Our executive producer is Danielle Stevens.
This is The Guardian.